Hello and welcome to the Why Wasn't It Better podcast. I am your host, Patrick Darms.
And I'm your co-host, Anton Paras.
And Anton, today is the first part of what is going to be a double feature. We are talking about the 1982 Disney film, Tron.
Let's go.
Just a reminder to our listeners, a little bit of admin. If you're enjoying Why Wasn't It Better and you want to help support the show, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/WWIB official. We've got some awesome perks for our supporters. There are various levels of subscription that you can financially invest yourself in if you love us and you want to support us. So yeah, Anton, the new Tron, which is going to be the third film, it's called Tron Ares. It is coming out in October. So I thought it might be a good idea to cover this one and Tron Legacy in preparation for that. Now, we covered Tron Legacy in I think our third or fourth episode. So a long time ago, and actually we're going to be doing Tron Legacy as a Patreon request.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm spoiling this now. That's why I picked this original film to cover. I was like, well, if the new one's coming out in October and we're doing the second one as a Patreon request, we might as well just complete the troika and cover this one.
Well, I thought it was going to be this or a Goofy movie, but this is amazing timing.
You know, you say that like it's a joke, Anton, and I tell you all the time, if you put it on the list, we can do it. So if you want to talk about a Goofy movie, we can do it.
Well, no joke, influential film, at least in my eyes. When talented computer programmer Kevin Flynn finds out that Edward Dillinger, an executive at his company, has been stealing his work, he tries to hack into the system. However, Flynn is transported into the digital world, where he has to face off against Dillinger's computerized likeness, Sark, and the imposing Master Control program. Aided by Tron and Yori, Flynn becomes a freedom fighter for the oppressed programs of The Grid. Released on July 9th, 1982 by Walt Disney Productions, directed by Steve Lisberger, screenplay by Steve Lisberger, with an additional story credit for Bonnie McBeard, starring Jeff Bridges, Bruce Boxleitner, David Warner, Cindy Morgan, and Bernard Hughes, with a budget of $17 million, so $55 million adjusted for inflation, at a box office of $50 million, so $163 million adjusted for inflation. You know, Pat, you started to give those reasons earlier on as we open this episode. Tron Ares is coming. And man, this is a very unique IP that gets a lot of cult attention.
It's one of the more interesting live action IPs to come out of Disney. Disney has so much in their library, a lot of which are hits. When Tron came out in 1982, like it made money. You said the box office numbers. It made a modest amount of money. The studio saw it as a disappointment. It definitely became a cult classic over the years, so much so that it got a belated sequel in 2010. I don't even know if this was considered one of the all-time great Disney movies, but it is certainly always one of the most interesting and one of the most important, which we're going to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
It's a pretty famous movie. I think most people have at least heard of it if they haven't seen it. It has a big fan base. I saw this movie as a kid, probably on the Disney Channel, I would imagine.
Well, I'm trying to think if this was one that would be distributed on the Disney Channel when we were kids, because I think they tend to focus a lot on their Disney Channel original movies, and then anything for distribution was like Remember the Titans.
Yeah, I don't know.
But I know for sure I saw this one on VHS.
This is one of those movies that is weird for me because I saw it a couple times as a kid. I mean, as like a young kid, I was probably like 6, 7, 8, like somewhere in that range.
Mm-hmm.
And it definitely left its mark on me. I remember being like captivated by the visuals. I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, being inside a computer program, that must be amazing. This is so cool. And then there was a lengthy period of time where I just didn't see it. And then I remember watching it shortly before the sequel came out in 2010. So there was like this big gap where it just wasn't a part of my life. So I can't say that this was one of my like favorite movies as a kid. And that's why I said earlier, it's just an interesting Disney film.
Now, interesting is a really good word to put it. As you said, this is an influential and groundbreaking film, right?
Oh yeah.
And I feel like even as a kid, I could sense that. Even though technology had improved so much effects wise in film, even by the time we were kids, watching it as a kid, I was really impressed because it also covered a subject matter that not a ton of films had covered, but I thought did really well. And of course, it's like being able to play video games in real life and be inside a video game. And that had a really profound effect on me as a kid, just with, again, the aesthetic and that whole concept. Now, I also think about a lot of the cultural influence that we see throughout pop culture outside of just the continuation of the video games, of course, and being included in Kingdom Hearts. One of my favorite episodes of Dexter's Laboratory was a Tron specific episode. Did you ever see that?
No.
Oh, it's so good. Dexter's Lab also, great series, amazing director, and of course had to have an homage to Tron. So very influential. Yeah.
A lot of things have referenced this over the years.
Oh, for sure.
And when I was rewatching this the other night, I rewatched it with my nephew and my 3 nieces. They're all young. None of them had seen this. But my oldest niece, who's a teenager, she remarked how the visuals she had seen in anime, in music videos, she said something like, I've never seen this before, but I know, she's like, the light bikes, I know this stuff. I've seen this in other things. And that's what's so interesting about this movie. It's dated in a lot of ways, which we're going to talk about. It's cheesy in a lot of ways that we're going to talk about. And yet, I give this movie so many points for its originality. And this is a 40-plus-year-old movie. I still haven't really seen anything like it.
Yep.
And you made the point, like, the video games, the digital world, right? Like, okay, a lot of other movies have scratched that surface, but this was one of the first, and I can't hammer this point enough that, like, I have not seen anything else like this.
Yeah. Going into the digital world and saving the world. I mean, it's this and Digimon.
Right. And that came years later.
Yeah.
I'm sure Digimon contained some reference to Tron, too. I can't think of it. I haven't seen Digimon since I was a kid, but I'm positive it did.
I mean, even just that concept of being sent to the digital world.
Yeah, I mean, did the Matrix take something from this? I'm sure it did, right?
I'm sure.
Even if just a kernel, there's a computer reference for you.
Good one.
It's the best I can do. I am not a computer programmer. I don't know a lot about computers, but sidebar for you, did you ever play the video game that came out in the mid-2000s, Tron 2.0?
I did. Yeah.
My understanding is that had a lot of that had a major part in reviving interest in the series, which ultimately led to Tron Legacy getting released in 2010. But that was a really fun video game.
That was a super fun video game. And I'm not shocked considering that the game mechanics are still very solid. There is new first-person perspective into the game that was a very popular element, but you still have the light cycle stuff. It's still the core mechanics for Tron, which is also a fun stand-up arcade cabinet game.
It is. My wife and I went to an arcade a few years ago, and we were playing Tron, and it was awesome. And, just more than anything else, I think we'll talk about it a little bit later in the discussion. This movie has a lot of flaws, which we're going to cover, but, man, there is some iconic imagery from this film. There really is.
It's huge.
It is. Well, let's get into it. Let's unless you have anything to add, I think we can get right into the production of this.
No, let's do it.
So the idea for what would become Tron came to Steve Lisberger in 1976 when he became fascinated by video games and he wanted to make a film based on one. The film's concept of entering a parallel game world was also inspired by the classic tale Alice in Wonderland. Lisberger had already created an early version of the character Tron in a 30-second long animation which was used to promote both Lisberger Studios and a series of various rock radio stations. This backlit cell animation depicted Tron as a character who glowed yellow. And by the way, Sidebar, you can see all of this in the pretty lengthy Making of Tron documentary. It's on YouTube. I think it's like a solid 90 minutes. It's as long as the movie. I don't know if you caught any of it, but it's really interesting. Lisberger and his production team, this production company, they borrowed against the anticipated profits off of their 90-minute animated television special, Animalympics, to develop storyboards for Tron with the notion of making an animated film. Yes, they were going to make it for the 1980 Olympics. That's kind of how this all got started, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and makes sense conceptually.
It does. Bonnie McBaird, or MacBird, however you choose to pronounce that, depends on where you live. She wrote the first drafts of Tron with extensive input from Lisberger. She created Tron as a character rather than a visual demo, and Flynn envisioning the latter as more of a comedic character to be played by Robin Williams. Robin Williams in this movie would have been wild.
I think that would have been super fun.
It would have worked fine, I think. We're all happy with Jeff Bridges, but Robin Williams would have done great with this.
Oh, that would have been really, really fun.
Disney was the place that Lisberger wanted to take it because the studio was interested in producing more daring productions at the time. Another sidebar, this is something we're going to talk about later. This was a much different time for Disney than the Disney we're used to today. Radically different company. In some ways the same, but in terms of I think the creative risks that they were willing to take, very different company.
Yeah, this was a pre-revolution. This was pre-Renaissance, of course.
Yeah.
And things had gotten a little bit stale at Disney.
A lot of misfires.
Yeah.
In 1980, Lisberger and his team showed some of the test footage to the Disney executives. Disney agreed to finance a test reel, which involved a flying disc champion throwing a rough prototype of the discs used in the film. It was a chance to mix live-action footage with backlit animation and computer-generated visuals. It impressed the Disney executives, and they agreed to back the film. At the time, this is really noteworthy. Disney rarely hired outsiders to make films for them. And Lisberger and his team were given a pretty cold reception because they, quote, tackled the nerve center, the animation department. They saw us as the germ from outside. We tried to enlist several Disney animators, but none came. Disney is a closed group, end quote. And as a result, they hired Wang Film Productions for the animation. The script underwent numerous changes when Disney became involved, including giving it a, quote, a more serious tone with a quasi-religious overtone, end quote, and removing most of the scientific elements. None of McBird's original dialogue remains in the final film, and she had to fight to receive a story credit.
French comic book artist Jean Giraud, also known as Mobius, was the main set and costume designer for the film. Most of the vehicle designs, including Sark's aircraft carrier, the light cycles, the tank, and the solar sailor, were created by industrial designer Sid Mead. Peter Lloyd, a high-tech commercial artist, designed the environments. Jeff Bridges said the part was, quote, tough to turn down because it was a chance to do something very new. I've had really good luck with first-time directors, and I could tell after the first meeting that Steve knew his stuff. Tron was one of the first films to make extensive use of any form of computer animation, and it is celebrated as a milestone in the industry. The computers used at the time could not perform animation, so the frames had to be produced one by one. In some of the more complex sequences, like the solar sailor moving through metal canyons, each frame could take up to 6 hours to produce. There was no way to digitally print them on film either. Rather, a motion picture camera was placed in front of a computer screen to capture each individual frame. That is insane.
We're paying lip service to how hard it was to make this film. Like, you can go on YouTube and watch documentaries of how this film was made. It's nuts.
Like, that is a labor of love.
Yeah.
Right? You really had to want to do it.
It took a long time for them to make this film. Which, continue, please.
Yeah. Most of the scenes, backgrounds, and visual effects in the film were created using more traditional techniques and a unique process known as, quote, backlit animation. In this process, live-action scenes inside the computer world were filmed in black and white on an entirely black set, placed in an enlarger for blow-ups, and transferred to a large format Kodalith high-contrast film. These negatives were then used to make Kodalith sheets with a reverse or positive image. Clear cells were laid over each sheet, and all portions of the figure except the areas that were exposed for the later camera passes were manually blacked out. Next, the colorless sheets and cell overlays were placed over a light box, while a VistaVision camera mounted above it, and it made separate passes and different color filters. So, pretty expansive process. Principal photography took place from April to July 1981, almost entirely on sound stages at Disney Studios in Burbank. The scenes featuring the multi-story NCOM laser bay were filmed at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory near Los Angeles. Post-production lasted almost a full year. 569 people were involved, including 200 inkers and hand painters. According to Rolling Stone, Tron had a total of 1,100 special effects shots, 800 of which involved actors.
I couldn't confirm this. That had to be a record for the time.
That's nuts.
1,100 visual effect shots is a lot for a film now,
Yeah,
let
that is
alone
nuts.
then. And just for some contemporary comparisons, Anton, The Empire Strikes Back, released 2 years before this, had about 550 effect shots. So this had double that. Return of the Jedi, which came out a year after this, had about 900 effect shots.
Yeah. So
there's no official record of like number of effect shots in film, but this had to have been a record for 1982.
All right. So 3-pointers made before 3-pointers were being counted in the league.
Pretty much, yeah. This is like Pete Maravich, Larry Bird,
yeah,
something like that.
I could see it. The score was composed by pioneer electronic musician Wendy Carlos. Upon release, the film grossed $33 million in North America and half that overseas. While it did turn a profit, both the box office and merchandise sales were well below Disney's expectations, and it sits at a 73% Rotten Tomatoes score. Now, the Academy Awards refused to nominate Tron for Best Visual Effects because they thought using CGI was, quote, cheating. So, very interesting production history for a very interesting film.
Can I put you on the spot really quick?
Yes.
So this is what was nominated and won for effects that year. E.T. won. The other nominees were Poltergeist and Blade Runner.
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, this should have been nominated.
Right.
My question for you is, should it have outright beat everything else?
Ooh, that's tough.
Blade Runner is, I think that's the winner probably, but this isn't bad. I mean, it's nuts this wasn't nominated. The fact that they thought it was cheating that's just how different the film industry was then.
Yeah, you can give credit for, I feel like you can give credit for being a true pioneer in the technology, but however one weighs the full movie aspect or final execution, I can see why a different film would win, right? But hands down, like, what this film is doing is just brave, right?
Do you know this was nominated for 2 Oscars?
Yes. Yeah.
Sound and costume design, which is deserved.
Interpretations change.
They do. They do. I understand why E.T. won. E.T.'s got some pretty awesome effects.
Yeah. I mean, they had to digitally create each individual Reese's Pieces that he ate. It's huge.
Do you remember the CGI edits that Spielberg made for the 20th anniversary, which he then he got rid of it. He was like, nope, I'm not doing that again.
Yeah, it was. I remember because they released it in theaters, and
yeah, I saw it in theaters.
Yeah, we went to go see it too, and I remember like the toothpaste scene.
Yes, and then more famously, they replaced the shotguns with like radios. Did you see the South Park parody of that?
Yeah,
where they did the same thing with Saving Private Ryan.
Yeah, it's so funny.
Speaking of South Park, we're going to talk about South Park a little bit later when we bring up the Master Control program.
Oh, Master Control.
Oh, Master C.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's talk why wasn't it better then. I want to start with the visuals because this is often cited as a criticism and praise for this film. This was as far as you could take CGI in 1982. In fact, they didn't just take CGI as far as they could. They broke through the boundaries, and this is one of the most groundbreaking CGI films ever.
Yep. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The amount of work that went into this film to make it possible is huge for CGI, for effects, and a major milestone in effects history. So it's amazing how underrated this film is placed in that consideration and conversation.
I think if you're into film history like we are, you know how important it is. But what I would say about it is, like, again, like I said, I was watching it with my nephew and my nieces. They were unimpressed by this, and I get it, right? It looks primitive. There's nothing particularly special about it now. But if you're old enough, like we are, to know the history of CGI, and, you know, both of us are old enough that we were experiencing CGI in film when it was pretty new, like Jurassic Park and, you know, throughout the 1990s, I can at least appreciate how important this film was, right? There's only about 15 minutes of CGI in this film. It's mostly in the scenes where you see the digital, like, terrain, quote unquote, or the patterns, or the vehicles, like the light cycles, the tanks, the ship. They're called recognizers, right? The ships.
The little,
like the C shapes.
What are they called? The Arc de Triomphes.
Those ones, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. This is not any kind of an advanced cinematic achievement, but it is a technological one. Or is it both? Because they're kind of one and the same here.
I think that it's just very influential in both categories. I'd say, like you said, one and the same. I feel like there's so much to consider in terms of inspiration of what one can do with computer graphics or even just effects in general once you see something break that barrier. And it's just nuts to think about how you can see all of that rippling effect in science fiction in the future.
Yeah, you can. And look, I'm not going to sit here and say that the special effects hold up. Like, the CGI, it definitely looks dated. It definitely looks like something from the early 80s. I think where it works for the film and why it holds up in the film is the design and the concept of everything.
That's a very fair point. Some of it feels a bit uneven, maybe jilted. You can see where even just seeing different characters walk through the terrain, it looks a little
janky.
It looks a little goofy or janky at times. But I feel like you can totally tell scenes that are a bit more polished. And my favorite scene is the light cycle battle.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And
it's edited tight.
Yeah.
It's a lot of like quick cutting, which that looks pretty modern, like the editing style.
And that is perfect storytelling within like a very short scene. So with using the computer graphics to be able to then basically do the storytelling, that's, I think, advancing the art, that's advancing the technology, and totally deserves the credit.
The other part of it too, you know, like we were talking about Blade Runner earlier. Like, Blade Runner's effects hold up in a much different way. I think Blade Runner looks amazing now, and it still looks pretty convincing.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's a very apples to oranges comparison when we think of Blade Runner's staying power with its effects versus this film. This is a film that relies very heavily on effects. The film almost is effects for its portions in the grid. But in Blade Runner, it's a bit more of a mix of both. It's not always heavy effects. I think it was a really good example of maxing out technology to its limits in a limited capacity.
What a year for science fiction, because think about these two films. We can throw E.T. in there, right?
Yeah,
E.T.'s a science fiction film. In fact, I'm just going to make this statement now without even thinking about it or really have any way to back this up. This is probably the best year for science fiction ever. I can't think of 3 better science fiction films from the same year, and you can't even compare the 3 of them. They're so radically different than one another. They're like 3 of my favorite sci-fi films.
Yeah, I think now I can't help but feel like I'm leaving out some of my other favorite sci-fi films
from the same year.
Not from the same year, but
can I give you one other one that had 2 of the best?
Sure.
1968, we had 2001: A Space Odyssey and Planet of the Apes.
Pretty huge. Pretty huge. But then a lot of other science fiction that I really love. I can't think of other big releases at the time, like Cronenberg's The Fly.
Aliens.
Pretty
good one.
Yeah.
Ooh, 1997.
Men in Black.
Men in Black, The Lost World, Jurassic Park, The Fifth Element, and Gattaca.
That's a pretty
good.
Yeah.
I just made this statement out of thin air, so I have no way of backing this up. But 82, that's good.
Yeah. That's a very, very strong year. And look,
So different
yeah,
too. Like, you
yeah,
can't compare them at all.
yeah. And I think about this too. We named a few films that are very influential in their own right, not only in science fiction, but in film. This really takes the cake for pushing those boundaries and riding that fine line between this could get really bad really fast or we're going to run with it.
I asked ChatGPT, give me a list of all of the things that have referenced the imagery from Tron, whether it's a film, a show, a music video, and ChatGPT told me, now take this with a grain of salt because it's ChatGPT. The list is too lengthy for me to even pull from because so many things. By the way, I'm not even thinking of anime. Now, we always think about how anime influences Western filmmaking. A lot of anime has referenced Tron.
Yeah. And
A lot.
look, if folks don't believe us, think about the light cycle. Does that remind you of a very famous motorcycle from Akira?
That's the that's the best example.
Yeah.
And of course, look, it's a music thing, but Daft Punk, the whole reason that why they composed the score for the second film is because this film had such an impact on them.
Yeah. The music, we haven't touched on the music yet. Also very influential.
Yes. I mean, is this movie dated? Like, yes, it is. I don't want to try to put this up on a pedestal and say that it's not a product of its time, because it is, but I think in the best way. Maybe the CGI is primitive. Sure. Okay, that's a fair criticism. But I think everything else is why this still works. The ship design, the costumes, the architecture of everything. Look, they hired the best conceptual designers that they could. Mobius and Sid Mead. That's as good as it gets. It's as good as it gets.
Yeah, like folks, if you don't if listeners, if you don't know Mobius, Sid Mead, Google it. You've seen their work.
Didn't Sid Mead work on Blade Runner as well?
Yeah.
Right.
Also, real quick, I can't believe I missed this. It's one of my favorite films of all time, and it released in 1982. The Thing.
It's a good one.
Sci-fi and horror.
Yeah. I'm mad at myself for not referencing that.
Oh,
Could you throw Poltergeist in there?
You could. It's a bit more paranormal.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But it's our podcast. We can do what we want.
And then somewhere off in the distance is
Gandhi? Oh, no, never mind. Sorry.
Yeah. Dark Crystal released that year.
That more fantasy, I guess, right?
More fantasy, but shouts out Jim Henson.
Shout out to Jim Henson. Another influential movie visually.
That got a Disney Plus revival.
Yeah, did you see that? I didn't.
No, it's funny because I really enjoyed.
No.
I really enjoyed the Dark Crystal, and I'm a big Henson fan, so I just haven't gone around to it.
I love your reaction. No.
Yeah, but back to this film.
Well, I have a good quote from you.
Mm-hmm.
Not from you, for you, from John Lasseter. He said, without Tron, there would be no Toy Story.
Yeah, I can see that. Absolutely.
Also, when it comes to the visuals, the version of this that's on Disney Plus looks incredible.
Oh, it looks so good. And we were talking about this before. Disney does an awesome job with their film resolutions.
They do. For as much crap as we give Disney for some of their creative decisions, and it's deserved, I think they have by far the best streaming platform. And when even older films, when they put something on there, they make sure it's the best quality. I think they have the best quality streams.
Yeah. I think
and physical media, because I know, like, I have Tron Legacy on Blu-ray, and it's a great looking film. I don't think either one of these is on 4K yet.
No, I don't think so. I would have looked out for it, because
I would buy both of these films on 4K, because
that'd be incredible.
This just in Blu-ray, it is, man, it's a good version.
But it's funny to think that now Disney's a great player in the physical media space, because of course their infamous Disney Vault.
They know the value of it. I would think we're going to get 4K versions of this and the second one soon because of the third one. I would imagine, right? I
would expect so.
Yeah. Well, I hope they release it as some kind of a 2-pack, because I would buy it. Because this is a pretty rewatchable film now that we're doing this on the pod.
Then I just think about it. If there's a 2-pack, that means Garrett Hedlund's getting paid royalties.
He would.
Well, that's fine. He can have it.
Yeah, I think the Daft Punk thing offsets it.
Yeah, it's true.
Or Jeff Bridges. Tony.
Tony. It's my favorite. Hey, Tony.
Why is that so funny?
Because
I
it's
don't
just
know.
hilarious.
Your services are no longer required.
It's also hilarious. Interesting connection. Jeff Bridges in a pre-Disney owned Iron Man film.
You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Disney was not involved at that point.
But can't escape the grasp of Disney.
It's very, very similar to the voice that he uses as Clue when he's got the helmet on in the second one. Identify. Bring him to me. Anyway, we'll get to that film a little bit later. It's the second part of this double feature. No surprise.
Mm-hmm.
Anton, let's talk about the plot, unless we have anything else to add to the visuals.
No, let's do it.
All right, this is where we're gonna have to unleash some criticism. The script is pretty weak.
It's a very simple story.
It's a very simple story. I describe it as a visual first, story second kind of movie.
Yeah, the whole ending of it too is kind of iffy.
Did they run out of money?
It feels like it, right? Like the way it's just like, hey, we did it.
And all of a sudden he's the guy in the helicopter. I guess. So NCOM, I have questions about NCOM. And by the way, there's going to be a lot of spoilers. If you haven't seen this movie and you're listening to this episode right now, I appreciate your support. It took me 150 episodes to get to this, Anton. I just assume when we talk about these movies that anyone listening has seen the movie. Because I don't know why you'd be listening to an episode about Tron 40 plus years later if you haven't seen Tron.
Yeah, it's
a podcast episode about Tron. You've probably seen Tron, right? Like, safe to say.
I think it's safe to say, unless, someone wants to. I would love it if maybe someone was interested in the new Tron movie and then this popped up in their feed and they've never seen the first Tron before. But
I would hope so too. And yeah. I will spoil the ending of the episode now. I recommend this movie.
Yeah. But
I really enjoy this movie.
But look, okay, this was made at a time where they invested in very different kinds of stories.
They did. The story of this movie is kind of a joke. If we're being
like, what is it? It's just honest. Basically corporate politics leads to just science fiction happenstance.
Yes. So the company that Flynn worked at before he got fired is called NCOM. I have questions for you about NCOM, Anton.
All right.
Is it basically whoever creates the coolest video game just gets to run the company?
That's what it feels like, right?
But Dillinger wasn't even CEO, right? They said he's like executive vice president.
Yeah.
So... But with the master control program, he's running the company, right?
Right. And at the same time, I'm just not convinced that there is no way for Jeff Bridges to just reveal that he's been stealing his work.
Is that a plot hole? It's like, why didn't you just protect your stuff, man? Like,
yeah.
Okay.
I think so.
We can talk about that now. It's a hole. He just put a pin in that because I want to bring this up a little bit later. Mm-hmm. Okay. This is a lightweight Disney movie from the early 80s, and this was a period of time when this was marketed as a family film, right? Which that meant it was for kids.
Mm-hmm.
And this movie didn't do gangbusters at the box office, right? It did okay. And my question for you is, I know the movie industry is completely different now, 43 years later, but I don't know that this is actually something for kids. A lot of stuff in here goes over the heads, I think, of most kids. I think you have to be a little bit older to appreciate this film.
I think so. You can't help but agree that the aesthetics of this film are going to appeal to kids.
The aesthetics, yes. But the plot, it's kind of a cheese fest. There's also some strangely serious stuff that they're trying to inject in here with the quasi-religious themes where the users are gods.
Yeah.
And the whole thing about there's this movement with the programs on the grid where some of them believe in the users and some of them don't. That never gets fully fleshed out. The plot is kind of a mess.
It's kind of a mess, and if you look at the films that they released in that same time period, There was a lot more teen oriented films, coming of age films, and none of them had good plots.
No, it's tough to really break down because there's not a lot to the plot, so I don't think there's a lot for us to analyze. It's paper thin.
Yeah, I'd say that the motivations feel very simple, and I think like that's why it gets so I'd say that the motivations are simple and it's harder to appreciate like a grander story because of it. But
well, there is no grander story. I mean,
it's like he becomes the CEO at the end.
It's not even clear.
Well, he's on the helicopter pad.
Well, we know from the sequel that he ended up running the company, but they don't clearly state it here.
Oh.
Because let's face it, they made this movie without really thinking about a sequel, and that's why I want to bring this point up, and I don't think it's a fault of this film, but I think when we get to Tron Legacy, I think it's a slight ding on the plot. So in this film, he's described as the most talented programmer that NCOM has ever employed. But I'm not sure that I buy him as a visionary that the second film presents him as. And here, right, okay, he invented these computer programs, or games, I should say. He invented these games. Dillinger took credit for his work and got a promotion and got him fired. And he's just trying to basically hack in to get credit for his invention. He's just trying to get his stuff back. He just wants recognition, right? Yeah, there's nothing in this film that presents him as some visionary who's going to reinvent the digital frontier.
No, and his whole demeanor through the film also doesn't scream visionary. But he even presents himself as such, right? Like he's like, I'm what you call the user.
Right. He's
like I'm just a dude.
He's possibly a pothead, although the film doesn't show it. Yeah, he's the dude, like you said. That's it. Yes. In some ways, this is a prequel to The Big Lebowski.
Yeah.
Which is kind of cool to think about, actually.
I think that actually kind of makes a bit more of an appeal for me that he can just present himself as like, look, I'm not bigger than life. I'm just a guy. So good writing on that part.
Sure. I have some questions about NCOM. So they appear to be a very diversified company, right?
Right.
What's the real world comparison? Like Microsoft?
Yeah, probably like Microsoft makes sense. Because of the video games, like Atari computers.
Right. And it is worth pointing out for some history. This film was released about 6 months before the video game crash in late 1982. Yeah. So video games, when this film came out, were very different to what would happen to the video game industry just a half a year after this.
It's look, folks, it's still pre-crash because E.T. was released this year, and that was one of the most infamous hallmarks of the video game crash. You ever hear about that story where Atari dumped like a haul of like thousands of copies of E.T. in the Nevada desert?
I have heard bits of that.
And they found it.
Did Atari claim like we don't know?
I don't know. I don't recall what Atari's official statement of it was, but enthusiasts found it and they were like, you can find all the footage online of just buried ET games.
If anyone's not familiar, Anton, what's the gist of this video game crash, right? There were just too many consoles, right?
Too many consoles. A lot of properties ended up just having third parties create their video games, and the third parties just did not put any care into their video games. So even if you had like ET, for example, coming out on a major system, the game itself is clunky, barely playable. People were angry, and it just caused a huge devaluation for video games and just crashing the market. It was a good reset because then people had to actually care about the craft and fix video games, but things were looking really bleak for video games.
Tron managed to survive. It's pretty famous. So NCOM in this film, I don't even know that I call them a video game company, right? Because they are working on a quantum physics powered laser that can digitize objects and teleport them into the digital world.
And you're telling me Kevin Flynn moved one of these into his arcade, right? That's weird.
We're going to talk about that more in, I think, the sequel. But would you say there are more plot holes in the sequel than here?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It makes you really rethink the second one.
You know what? I'm actually glad you mentioned that because this was the first time I watched them back to back.
There was no reason why Garrett Hedlund would have needed to go to the arcade if not for the fact that they had moved the machine into the arcade.
Can you remember to bring up some of these points on Friday when we record that episode?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
did you ever watch them back to back before this?
No, I hadn't. So it was
I think you'll
very
agree
helpful.
with me here. Visually, they connect very well. Everything that's established in this film, you see resurface visually in the second film, which is cool.
Right.
Story-wise, I don't think they connect well at all. But we'll talk about Tron Legacy when we get to Tron Legacy. We're just talking about Tron now. And I think the faults of the plot of Tron Legacy should not be held against this film because that's not fair.
No, and look, it's within just Tron itself. It has enough areas where we're just, not trying to make fun of the plot, but just say like it was just a bit more simple. Whereas Tron Legacy, I think it's its own beast in terms of plot confusion.
It's dumb. It has dumb plot holes in it. There's no getting around it. Look, we already covered it once, so the listeners can go back and listen to that episode. Okay, what is the master control program trying to do?
Control the company. It's bored. I don't know.
I do think it's kind of cool because it's basically Skynet before Skynet.
Yeah, and the whole concept was also used in other famous kids-oriented like sci-fi films.
War Games?
Yeah.
Awesome movie. Can we cover War Games at some point just because it's an awesome movie?
That's a very nostalgic. So
I love that movie.
The only reason I even saw War Games was because I saw a segment of it on that VH1 show, I Love the 80s.
Oh, yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah. And I was like, I gotta watch this.
The only reason I saw War Games is because I was watching Ferris Bueller as a kid with my dad, and he brought it up to me.
Oh, okay. Nice. Yeah, I think it's a cool concept.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a very fascinating concept, I should say.
It's not outdated in some ways because the MCP in this film is an artificial intelligence who wants to gain power by assimilating programs, right? Which you could totally imagine an AI doing now.
Yeah, well, I would just argue if Dillinger created the MCP, right?
That's what the handy dandy novelization that I own states. That Dillinger made the MCP.
I am not convinced.
Well, the novelization explains that Dillinger basically made the master control program and then it became sort of sentient and he lost control of it.
So I think that one of the core concepts, though, with any AI creation is putting in fail-safes. And I think that was not really included in the storyline.
Hell no.
But that's the thing, like why I wouldn't be convinced that someone with that level of expertise to even build an AI like this wouldn't put in a failsafe. Like that just doesn't feel right.
Well, that's part of we're putting more thought into this now than I think the screenwriters did. And I'm sorry, Steve Lisberger, but
yeah.
This movie is a 90-minute tech demo, and they didn't place a high premium on the plot, but this is a movie podcast, so we're going to get into the plot. So the movie insinuates Flynn tells Alan Bradley and Lori, right?
Mm-hmm.
That Dillinger isn't very smart, but he's very, very sneaky. It's like, okay, so he's not a smart programmer. He wasn't smart enough to create these video games, but he was smart enough to create the master control program, which, judging this 40 plus years later, the MCP is a far more impressive achievement than games.
Yeah, basically dude built the equivalent of like a nuclear warhead.
He built Skynet.
Yeah, like that's, again, I'm just not convinced.
No, it doesn't make sense. A Skynet, aka master control program, aka Moses from the Super Best Friends in South Park.
When he's spinning around like that, he does look just like Moses.
Hilarious.
Which directly referenced, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, wouldn't, judging by like technological inventions, isn't the master control program like a far bigger deal than just video games? Like, yes.
Yeah. But I think that maybe if I'm trying to interpret the story in a different way, it's that Kevin's ability to code video games and his ability to understand the grid shows that he has a much more creative mind that to create versus Dillinger's, which was to create something that destroys. And
I guess. I
then
mean,
on some level, Dillinger doesn't have the ability to make things that can benefit society or that people can enjoy. So like
but the MCP could have benefited society if he tried.
If he tried, but I don't.
Anton, you're reaching.
I'm trying to reach. I'm really trying.
I also have questions about the power of the MCP, right? So it's able to activate the laser bay, right, and pull Flynn into the grid. But once he's in the grid, it apparently can't keep track of him at all.
No, I don't think so. Like when it breaks through the light cycle.
Yeah, he just like yells at Sark. He's like, "Find them." It's like, but So I don't know how much. I don't think we should talk about this thing anymore because it just doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't make sense. But I think like that's where once you build or once you write a character that's powerful, it's hard to believe there are constraints.
Right, because he even tells Dillinger, I'm talking about the MCP like he's a person. He basically is. He's an artificial intelligence, right? He tells Dillinger, "I'm going to hack into the Pentagon. I'm going to hack into the Kremlin." So it's obviously using some early form of the internet.
Yeah, some sort of network.
Right, but they don't add much context to it. And then, of course, the point of putting the programs in the games, that's not explained either. It's cool. It just gives us an excuse for like really cool action sequences. I'm not complaining about that.
Yeah, I think it's all the programs are meant to be metaphors, right?
Yes.
And I think in that sense, it's cool how they're able to translate it into the film, but like you said, not really fleshed out story-wise.
Look, we're putting more thought into it than I think they did. I think it's a little frustrating for me because, we're trying to judge all films' plots equally, which is probably misguided a little bit on our part. But I think the world building in here is pretty cool.
Man, it's like I'm going to just go back to the conjecture of, or go back to the perspective of you can have the best of both worlds, but of course
it's rare.
It's rare and it's hard. And if you're going to have studio executives really put their claws into the story and really mold it into whatever their vision is of what is marketable, you can't put that against the film. That's a reason why it probably didn't succeed, but that's just a unfortunate point of circumstance.
I have one more major question about this film's plot, and it's not a fault of this film, but I want to bring it up because it will resurface in Tron Legacy. So the scene in this film when Tron goes to the input-output tower to contact Alan, right, his user, right?
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, I think it's interesting with the plot of this film, sidebar, before I get back to the question. Flynn is the hero, but Tron is the superhero.
Oh, Tron is so cool.
He's a great character.
Yeah.
How does that input-output tower work? Does it work like a page? Like a page? Notice I'm using the word page.
Yeah.
How does he contact Alan? Was Alan just sitting around at his terminal? I think he was.
Ready. Yeah.
Because I think when they sneak Flynn into the building, what we can assume, the film doesn't show it, I'm assuming that Alan and Laurie go up to Alan's computer.
I was going to say there's no real indication of like how fast time goes in the grid versus in real life. So
no, the sequel establishes that time moves slower in the grid, but this film doesn't need to, I guess, but it is a curious thing of it. The only why I'm asking about the page, because the entire plot of the second film gets triggered when Clue sends Alan Bradley's pager a message, and that falls apart almost immediately. It doesn't make any sense.
Oh, it does not make any, but it's a callback to the first film.
And they don't even explain it well.
Nope, they do not.
This film's 90 minutes long. I don't love the pacing. It's a little slow in parts. There's stretches of it that drag. There's more dialogue in the first half than I remembered, and there's a real lack of exposition. If you recall, when the film opens, it just kind of drops you into Flynn communicating with Clue 1.0. And if you're not familiar with the plot of this film, and I think this is probably another theory why the film didn't do as well as Disney hoped, it's pretty confusing if you don't know what to expect. You're not really sure what's going on.
Yeah, we definitely have the luxury of the sequel and then all of the other resources that have pieced together more of it. But you make a really good point. I know I had a lot of assumed knowledge going in that it made it easier to consume the plot. But if it's something fresh and new for an audience, I'd only assume even for your nieces and nephews watching, it was a bit of an experience.
They were confused.
Yeah.
I had to do a lot of explaining. I'm like, well, that's Clue. He's Flynn's program, and now he's dead. He got de-rezzed.
He got de-rezzed.
Now they're playing High Lie. High Lie is a game that's not popular at all in the United States, but it's more popular in Latin America. But this is a digital version of it that they play in the grid, and they have to knock out discs in the floors, and that's where they just lost interest.
Yeah.
It gives us some pretty cool set pieces, though.
We already talked about the light cycle battle.
Yeah. I like the High Lie stuff, too.
Yep.
It's pretty cool.
Yep.
Let's talk about everything else. This is just a blanket reason. I mean, I would say the acting is about what you would expect from a 1980s Disney movie. I mean, Jeff Bridges is awesome. I wouldn't call it an amazing Jeff Bridges performance, but I think it works for the film.
Yeah, I think he's probably the strongest in the film.
He's definitely the strongest. Well, is he?
Ooh, actually, that's a really good call out.
Ooh, yeah. Well, you know what's cool about this film? Everyone has basically a dual role. David Warner has a triple role. I think he's my favorite performer in the film.
That's a good call out.
He plays Dillinger, he plays Sark, and he's the voice of the MCP.
So definitely does some very heavy lifting in the film.
He really is one of the all-time great character actors. He was in everything. Every kind of performance, he did it. He gave it his all. Remember, Anton, this is the same guy who was fully committed to playing Ivan Ooze in a terrible Power Rangers movie.
But he did it.
He was all in on it.
Yeah.
I love David Warner. You know, he's briefly in another film that we're covering this season, Star Trek V, which he has like 3 lines.
Interesting appearance, but yeah, no, I totally agree. Should get a bit more credit, or a lot more credit, but
should have been nominated for an Oscar for this.
Yeah.
I'm kidding. Probably not.
Yeah. But entertaining for sure.
It's a wonderful character actor performance from him.
Yeah. And I mean, I definitely lean towards giving Jeff Bridges a lot of credit just because he's also had the most successful career out of anyone that was in the film. And
I was being sarcastic. Jeff Bridges he carries this film.
Yeah. And he's, I don't know, just a dude.
He's very naturally likable. He's very charismatic. You know, he's a very easy guy to root for. And it's interesting because he can play bad guys in film too, but he's much better as the hero. It is weird, though, how he's not the superhero of the film. He's the user, right? He is the one that theoretically should be going into the grid and saving all of the programs, and yet the titular character is the one who really is the superhero. It's pretty satisfying to see Tron do his thing. I actually forgot when Tron throws his disc at Sark and cuts his disc in half and basically slices his brain open. It's pretty graphic for a 80s Disney movie.
Or not only that, but even just during the light cycle scene, crashing your light cycle into just the wall of beam. That was not gruesome, but gruesome.
It is. I remember that having an effect on me as a kid. I'm like, wait, is he dead?
Well, that was one of the things that I referenced to you, and I was like, yeah, they had some things that stuck with me as a kid. And I think that it touched on this fear of claustrophobia because you're getting more enclosed in the light cycle race until it's you're imminent doom.
As far as the rest of the cast goes, I mean, Bruce Boxleitner I like him. I
Mm-hmm.
haven't seen him in much else besides from these two Tron films. I mean, I know he was probably more of a better known actor then. I like him in this role, though. I wish he had more of a role in the second film, which we're going to talk about, because
Mm-hmm.
he plays Tron. Cindy Morgan, who plays his girlfriend, she has a little bit of a history with Kevin Flynn.
Mm-hmm.
They don't go too much into it, thankfully, because this isn't that kind of film. And then whoever the guy is that plays Ram, they all do pretty well. But this isn't an acting movie. It's just not.
No, it's an experience movie. It's a chance to show off all this shiny technology.
It's a 90-minute tech demo.
Right.
Now, we covered another tech demo a while back called Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within. This movie has way more heart than that, I think.
Yeah. Which is also, we went into the reasons why for Spirits Within. Very different circumstances. This was a team that wanted to tell a very original story while pioneering a technology, whereas Final Fantasy was, let's make some money. We made a lot of money off of Final Fantasy VII.
This is a good question for you, I think. That movie, Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within, also tried to touch on some quasi-religious mumbo jumbo.
Yeah.
Why do we think higher of Tron than we do that?
I mean, I think on a technical level, or even just like a more, okay, I want to back up. Why do we think more highly of this film? I do think that this is more influential when it comes down to it. And there is so much that still references not just the aesthetic, but what this film has done for CGI in general and for effects in general, versus Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within. It's just much more generic in its execution, its character design, its overall look and feel. But the actual technology used to create the whole film, we've already talked about, hey, like, that was pretty cutting edge. Got to give them some credit for that. But other than that, the influence really isn't felt.
I'll give you my theory on this. Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within was pretty soulless, empty animation and characters from the start. This at least has one foot in the real world with Jeff Bridges' character and Alan Bradley and Laurie. So you have some investment in Jeff Bridges' character, Kevin Flynn, getting out of the grid and getting back to reality, right? You have that tension, so to speak. Final Fantasy had nothing like that. You're just like, they're in the desert looking for some kind of ghost thing. It's not really clear. It's vague. At least in this film, it felt like a race to how is Flynn going to get off the grid and get back to reality.
Yeah, and look, I mean, sure, story-wise, the stakes do feel more real. There's a lot more than just really bad ghosts or really flimsy ghost plots that weren't going for Spirits Within. That's just one of its glaring holes.
One of many. A couple points. The sound design in this movie is amazing. Rewatching this now on like a good sound system, all the different vehicle sounds, really, really cool, especially for the 80s. It would sound great now. The Solar Sailor is a Goodyear blimp that they modified the sound of, just stuff like that.
It's very clean, right? Very clean.
The slowed down purr of Liz Berger's pet cat became the master control program.
Oh, that's so neat, right?
All right. I think we can bring this home very shortly.
Yes.
Wendy Carlos did the score for this film. What do you think?
Ooh, very fits the mood, right?
It's all over the place, but I like it.
Yeah. And I can see how something like this influenced Daft Punk.
Yeah, I don't think it's nearly as memorable as what Daft Punk would do for the second film, but I think it's very effective for this film. I'm a fan.
Yeah, look, it's just too hard to compare. What Daft Punk did is one of the greatest of all time, right?
Oh, yeah. There's not enough good things you can say about the Daft Punk score for the second one. This ain't that, but it's good.
No, but it's really good. It's good.
Yeah, I like it. It. This was a really experimental time for Disney. I think we can sort of get into this now. You could call it a lean period for Disney. They weren't having a lot of success with their live action films.
No.
It doesn't mean they were doing bad stuff. There's a film that I really want to cover with you eventually called The Black Hole
Mm-hmm.
that they released a few years before or a couple years before this in 1979. It was a huge bust. They spent a lot of money on it and it didn't work out for them. This was also released around the same time where Don Bluth led his mass exodus from the animation department. And it's hard to wrap your head around it now, but Disney was struggling
Yeah.
when Tron came out.
It was this period in time that Disney's cost saving measures was really felt, not only in its parks, its creativity, its animation especially.
They almost stopped making animated films at one point.
And if you don't believe us, there's a lot of footage online that shows the different templates that they use across their animated films of basically the same motions, dances. Again, basically just building templates that they use for multiple Disney films, and a lot of them, some of them Disney classics. So it was not a great time for Disney.
This was the highest grossing live action film that they made during this time, and it didn't make great money like we highlighted. So I can understand why they got away from doing this. You know, if you try these types of films for long enough and they don't pan out, you're just going to stop doing them.
Yeah, but it was also such a huge shift from their films in the 60s and 70s where live action films were a lot more very kid oriented.
Yes, a lot more whimsical.
We're talking Swiss Family Robinson, of course. We're talking Herbie.
The Parent Trap.
Parent Trap, Escape from Witch Mountain,
Song of the South. Oh wait, no, not that one.
Oh wait.
Oh, never mind.
Can't talk about that one. But yeah, this is a interesting time to have experimental sci-fi CGI film, which is like even cooler that Disney was willing to do something like this.
Yeah, I don't think they do it now.
No.
They would just do another questionable Star Wars streaming series, man.
No, they would just do Tron Ares.
You know, there's a character in Tron Ares who's named Dillinger. So there's going to be some kind of connection to this film.
There was also a Dillinger character in Tron Legacy.
There was. And they're doing nothing with that. I think it's important to remember for the listeners, the Tron Ares that we are getting this October, it is not the third Tron film that they were originally planning after Tron Legacy. This is a different iteration of a sequel.
Yeah, this is basically it got pushed through because Mobius the Living Vampire decided he wanted to be in it, which is like for better or worse, this is why we get Tron Ares.
It don't remind me. I'm going to how reluctantly are you going to go to the theater to see that?
I mean, I'm going to go. It's just
with a theoretical gun to your head, you just knowing that it's not going to be good.
Hey, I watch Love Hurts very wholeheartedly.
I'm sorry for you, and I still don't know why you did because there was no hope for that.
Yeah.
Look, we can wrap this up. I don't really have any other thoughts to add for this. I like Tron.
Yeah, Tron's fun. If you look up, this is one of the cooler collabs I've seen. The Marvel collab on comic book covers with Tron is really cool. And then I can't really think of, the South Park guys are huge Tron fans because it's not just Moses that's the big influence or the big kind of the big pop culture reference to Tron in the series, but there's the infamous Tron guy. And then also, I forget which episode, but directly references getting basically Troned into the internet.
Who isn't a Tron fan?
Yeah. Whether or not they know it.
Whether or not they know it. I'll go first to give my rating because I don't want your rating to influence mine like it did on the last film we covered, which is not your fault but mine, so I'm not blaming you for that.
All right. Go ahead.
But I let you talk me into changing my score on the last film. And that's my fault, not yours.
Well, please don't tease us so much. Let us know.
I really recommend this film if you haven't seen it with the proper expectations. If you're a film buff in any way, you're going to find some appreciation for it. If you're going to judge it by today's standards, you might be bored because The CGI in this film, it is a product of its time. I don't think it's paced as well as some films could have been. It's only 90 minutes long, but there are parts that drag for me. This is not some underappreciated, deep meaning masterpiece. There are some serious things that this film tries to tackle, I think quite clumsily. Some of the users or God stuff is really strange, and I don't really know what they were doing with it, but the plot and the performances are pretty campy. It's a PG-rated Disney movie from 1982. All of these things are valid criticisms, but I am willing to forgive a lot of it because of how the film's concepts and visuals are executed, which I think are excellent. This is such an influential movie, and it's a fun movie. You know, for as silly as the plot is, the set pieces in it are really spectacular to watch. I find this movie fun and charming, and you have a lead performance from Jeff Bridges and a really great villain performance from David Warner. I think that alone makes it worth watching. It gets a lot of points from me from being so unique. In the 40 plus years since this film's release, I really haven't seen anything else quite like it apart from the sequel. It's a retro cool movie. I think it's really entertaining. I like it very much like I like the second film, but the reason why I like the sequel, Tron Legacy, a little bit more is that film has some emotional punches in it with the father and son stuff between Jeff Bridges and Anton's favorite actor, Garrett Hedlund, which we'll get to. But all joking aside, Tron Legacy has some emotional punches in it that I think this film lacks, and that's why I will rate this film slightly less than what I give Tron Legacy. So I give the original Tron a B-.
This is a very cool film, and I mean that in every sense of the word. It is unique. It sets the trend. It doesn't follow a trend. And it's a pioneer. And I feel like all those reasons are just such high praise for this film. And despite its age, there are a few things that we always have to put within the context of it was the first of its time. And I highly, highly, highly recommend it because of its place in history and because of this cool factor that is really hard to emulate. And it's not just because, of course, we have Jeff Bridges as the dude, but because it is also overall a very unique story, and I love unique stories. And what's not to like about the action set pieces in this film, just the overall care and attention, and I think you put it best, Pat, the heart that this film has. I think that that is something that will completely shine through no matter what generation is watching this film. This is a film with a lot of heart. Because if the crew didn't, there's no reason why there would have been so much attention put into making these effects for this film. Because, like, folks, it is no joke. Look into the behind the scenes. It is a lot of work to get this on screen. I totally agree with you. I really, really enjoy the first one a bit more than I enjoy the second one a bit more than I enjoy this one. But I guess only slightly less. Or yeah, I only like this one slightly less. So I do agree with you. This is a B- for me.
Yeah, I really struggled with how to rate this just because we say this a lot, Anton, but like I really do try to rate every film's flaws equally, which I realize is impossible because you're always going to have an emotional attachment to some films that you don't for others. And I do have a lot of emotional attachment to this film and the sequel, but I think it's fair. We're only human. We're human after all, as Daft Punk might say. Well, that's it for Tron Legacy. Or sorry. Well, that's it for Tron. That's it for the legacy of Tron. End of line, as they would say in this film. Anything to add before we close this out?
I'm still mad at myself for not thinking about The Thing.
But you did.
But I did.
So you can forgive yourself now. Well, the next episode that you're going to hear is Tron Legacy. The plan is to release these both back to back in the same week as a really nice double feature. So that'll be the next episode. I think, that's it for this week's edition. Why wasn't it better?
All right. We'll see you listeners in the grid.
Yes. We'll see you then. Take care, everyone. Thanks for listening.